But good. All right. Greetings to you all, wherever you are and whatever time of day. Uh, we're going to start with our usual agenda to make sure we don't miss anything before listening to Ambassador Eleanor Bazile give her talk on diplomacy, positive neutrality, and peace, a virtuous cycle, question mark. But first, we have reports by participants about relevant initiatives, possible resources, and upcoming events. Does anyone want to start? I have a couple of points, but would anyone like to kick off?
Perhaps, Michelle, you can go ahead. I have a couple of points as well,
Okay.
but maybe you start.
Yeah, so I'm going to focus on the UK, usually all over the place, but there's some important things happening right now in the United Kingdom. So the first one is that very clearly state repression against freedom to protest against war and ecocide is significantly increasing in the UK, and that's very concerning. A new report that analyzes the imprisonment of protesters in Britain since 2019 has actually argued that courts are increasingly using remand detention, contempt of proceedings, and lengthy custodial sentences in responses to acts of civil disobedience and direct action. Now, the report's called Britain's Political Prisoners, and it was co-published by Queen Mary University of London and Defend Our Juries. The report really strips away that Britain remains committed to democratic principles. It reveals that peaceful protesters are being jailed in ever-increasing numbers, and it's particularly noteworthy that Palestine solidarity protesters have faced particularly harsh periods of remand, with 60% held over 6 months, and that exceeds the typical custody time limits raised, and raising serious concerns about the disproportionate use of pre-trial detention. I'll provide the link to this report. It's an important report. It's showing shifts in the UK that are now being revealed more strongly by independent investigations and research. I'll put the link in the chat. It is an important development in the UK, obviously linked with the militarization of the UK and collusion with Israel, the Israeli government, around questions of genocide and so on. The other item I want to flag is that there is going to be a very large international conference against war in London on the 20th of June. It's organized by the Stop the War Coalition. And again, I'll post the statement of this event in the chat after this. So those are my two bits from the UK. Grazia, you indicated that you had a few more items you wanted to highlight.
Yes, and Jeff has just raised a hand. He might have something from Canada. But let me say that perhaps, in fact, Ingeborg is better than me about speaking about one thing that impressed me is that the Grandmothers Against Genocide and other groups in Norway have filed a criminal complaint against their prime minister, against the finance minister, the former NATO General Secretary Stoltenberg, and others, because the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway has violated the investment rules in general of international law, because they have been investing in arms, firms that produce arms that have been sold to Israel and thereby contributing to genocide. And maybe Ingeborg knows more and can tell us more about it. And my second point is that there are a number of us, not as a big number, but a few who are considering going to Brussels on the 14th to participate in the Europe-wide meeting against Rearm Europe. You know that Stop Rearm Europe, Europe is calling for a major meeting in Brussels on the 14th. And we will be participating as individuals, but also as elders against disarmament in the planning meeting of the Stop Rearm Europe coalition. So these are my two announcements. And now I guess, Michelle, do you see the hands raised? Because Jeff has his own hands raised.
No, I don't see the hands raised. But Jeff, over to you.
Yeah. Just a quick couple of things that people may want to know about in Canada. First of all, the Stephen Guilbeault, who was the former Minister of Environment, stepped down from the cabinet last fall in reaction to Prime Minister Carney's retreat on climate. Has now announced that he's leaving Parliament altogether. So a fairly strong statement calling out the pretty significant retreat on climate regulation in Canada. I also want to let you know that yesterday and today, the biggest arms trade fair, or whatever you call that, in North America is happening in Ottawa, and Quakers and others are gathered to protest this. So I ask you to send your energy in support of that protest and vigil against the arms trade. And the last thing I want to let you know about, and I'll update you as this develops, is that the Canadian Front Service Committee, I'm on the executive committee and I'm a lifelong Quaker, is promoting a minute at the annual meeting of Quakers, Canadian yearly meeting in the summer, on a minute on reparations for Indigenous people. So this is, I think, a significant step forward, and that it's a minute to have meetings and at the local monthly meeting level up to the yearly meeting level, actually put money behind Indigenous support. And I think this is quite significant. It gets past kind of the what's sometimes been pro forma acknowledgments of harm and trying to work on reparation. So I wanted to let you know about those things, and I will update you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Ingeborg raised her hand, Michelle.
Ingeborg, would you like to speak now?
Yes, just briefly to follow up on Gracia's reference to Norway. And we actually have several, of course, peace organizations in Norway, one of them being the Grandmothers for Peace. They meet every week in front of the parliament with a pamphlet where they bring out the issues that they want to have discussed, that they react to. And they have actually taken to court the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, Mr. Stoltenberg. And now I'm working with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Norway, who is making a quite strong reaction to the Norwegian revised national budget, which we consider to be against Norwegian interests and is more a budget, a war budget than a peace budget. And we are flabbergasted and angry that the budget gives much less resources to the UN than we normally have done, with the UN that is desperately in need of resources after the mistreatment of the United States. They give instead more money, much more money to NATO and to the military system, to the World Bank, IMF, World Trade Organization. And even we have looked at where the money is being cut on the social human side, and they cut on UN Women's Project, education project with UNESCO, food security with FAO, and um, uh, less support to the African Development Bank, less to Colombia, which has been a very important country in the peace process with Norway, less to Cuba. So we question, is this a Norwegian budget or is it a US budget? So just to tell you the situation in Norway. And we feel it is the NATO budget that has entered the Norwegian state budget with Stoltenberg as a finance minister. And we had a very active, or rather active, not enough active, ethics council within the big oil or pension fund of Norway, which is enormous. And in the petrol fund or pension fund, we were not supposed to give money for, particularly not for nuclear arms or parts that could be used for nuclear arms. But now Stoltenberg has closed down the ethics committee, saying as long as we are members of NATO, being a nuclear an organization based on a nuclear strategy, why should we not be allowed to invest also in arms, in nuclear arms? So it is very alarming. Thank you. That's all from an angry Ingeborg right now.
Well, thank you, Ingeborg. These are really important developments and insights. And if you were able to share a little bit more information as a link or by email on the actions of the group of women who've taken to court ministers, that would be fantastic, because obviously this is something one would want to emulate in many countries.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ingeborg. Really important. Thank you.
Michelle, I don't know if you see it. Paul Srivastava raised hand.
Thank you. Paul, over to you. I'm having problems seeing hands on my iPhone. So, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. I'm inspired by Inga's report on the budget and just want to remind people the 2027 US war budget that is being requested by the Heritage Foundation is now upwards of $1.5 trillion under the assumption of a war in Indochina in 2027. So I think the whole world is moving towards increased defense budgets. By 2030, our anticipation is that global defense spending will double from where it was in 2024, opening up a whole new world. And now we can see that this money is not coming out of thin air. It's coming from social programs, education programs, healthcare programs, etc. So I think we need to be preparing ourselves for, unfortunately, for a period of bigger war budgets and hence bigger conflicts and social tensions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for that information. Yeah, it's piecing together all the information. Is there anyone else who would like to share some news? If not, I don't see any hands. Yeah, I don't see any hands, so maybe we could then turn to Ambassador Eleanor Basile, and which is, going to be the more substantive part of our conversation today. Her thoughts on the topic she's proposed to speak about. Diplomacy, positive neutrality and peace, a virtuous cycle, ? But before Ambassador Eleanor Basile presents, I just want to highlight a few points about her. She's an Italian diplomat, a political scientist, and a writer of fiction and international politics. as well as a journalist and very influential political commentator. And she's held diplomatic positions in various countries, including Canada, Madagascar, Hungary, and Portugal. And after serving as Italian ambassador to Belgium and Sweden from 2013 to 2021, she resigned from the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in February 2023. Elena is well known today among Italian political commentators. She's a columnist and a public speaker committed to developing a very well-informed and critical political stance on geopolitical issues that range from Ukraine to Gaza and the war against Iran. In her latest book, she discusses the possibility of a European radical reform to regain democratic legitimacy, social justice, prosperity, and peace. I can't pronounce all the words of the titles, but it's Approdo per naufragi, Como construire la paz. I assume the book is available in Italian for the time being. It probably will be translated later into English and other language. Elena will tell us. But for now, we're all ears to hear Elena and her talk, which is entitled Diplomacy, Positive Neutrality and Peace, a Virtuous Cycle. Elena, we're very, very happy to have you with us, and it's over to you.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation, for your attention. I must say that I'm always a bit surprised when I see that people, they still gather and discuss and try to understand international or internal politics. Because as you know, we live in times of a unique thought, and the media have been, also if propaganda has always existed, but today I think there is a sort of osmosis, I don't know if we can say that in English, very strong link between media and 1% leading class, as maybe it was never in the past. And the civil society is bombarded by propaganda, by a unique narrative of how things are in the international scene. So it's a pleasure to see that people do not give up. Unfortunately, I have noticed that it is easier to meet people of my generation. It's much more difficult to see the young people really believing in a political project that can reform the existent situation. This is, I think, the results of certain developments that have brought us to the today's situation. Well, I will refer to, in my presentation, to the book that you mentioned that could be translated as a harbor for us, the shipwrecked, or the landing for us, because above all in Italy, I'm not sure that everywhere in Europe, but in Italy, I could observe that there are so many associations in the civil society that would like to oppose to the war strategies that are common to what we call the Ursula majority. I mean, the rightist parties, but also the European socialists that support the policy of the European Commission. And then you have a very fragmented dissentiment, opposition. When I decided to write this book that was published with the Paper First, which is the publisher of the newspaper on which I write every week, Il Fatto Quotidiano, I wanted above all to open a debate on some particular issues, such as Europe, such as the causes of the historical processes that have brought us to this dystopia. Because really, if 30 years ago they had informed us that Europe would have been ready for a war with the nuclear power, this powerful neighbor that Europe has on its eastern border. If we were informed that Europe would have been accused to be complicit in the genocide of the Palestinian people, and would have justified all the international violation, well, I think 30 years ago we wouldn't have believed it. So for me, it was important to ask the world of this dissentiment in Italy to keep the different sensitivities that they have, but to try to get a unitarian approach to the opposition to the Ukrainian and Middle East wars, because otherwise we risk the total irrelevance. We're not going to influence the policies. And so it was important for me to say to communists, socialists, even rightist people, we have to ask ourselves how to separate the European interest from the neoconservative interests that are typical of a leading class in the States, at least since the beginning of the 90s up to our days. And the first thing which for me is important is to understand and agree on the geopolitical, economic, social, and cultural factors that have made possible the today dystopia. So the book tries to answer to this main question. The second problem was Europe, because I think there is a fake dichotomy. There is a manipulation of the public opinion when the politicians and the analysts that have allowed the treason, the betrayal of the most inspiring principle of Europe, the same people today, they present themselves as pro-Europe. And they call the people who reject this Europe populist, sovereignist. I think this is a terrible manipulation, because most people reject this Europe above all because this Europe is not the federal, democratic, and social Europe, which was in any case celebrated also in the treaties. At least the social rights are mentioned in the treaties, the integrated European Union is mentioned in the treaties, the economic convergence is mentioned in the treaties, peace and prosperity were European ideals. Well, we have betrayed these ideals. And it's important to me also to say to the people of dissentiment, because I think my position is a minoritarian position, because most of the people who criticize the today Europe, they would like to go back to the national state. And I think this is not exactly what they would like to have, because we cannot go back. The national state is not going to be possible any longer because of the economic interdependence. And in any case, a nation, a single state, let's speak about Italy or France or Germany, and you can imagine the little state countries such as Belgium or Luxembourg. How can they resist to the pressure of the financial lobbies? And what's more, if Italy or Germany had the leadership which wanted to lead the country out of NATO, this would not be possible because, for example, in Italy, we have 120 military American NATO bases. And so if we wanted this kind of development, I think we would end exactly like Chile in 1973 with a coup d'etat. If you remember Enrico Berlinguer, in 76, the communist leader, in 76, he had almost the same consentment as the Christian Democrats. Mm-hmm. And the first thing he did was saying, we are for Italy to stay in NATO. Why? Was he scared by the Soviet Union? Not at all. He was scared by the United States. And because in 73 we had the coup d'etat operated by Kissinger in Chile, he understood that he had to reassure the CIA. So it was important for me to underline that if we really would like to have a different leadership in Europe, and a leadership who takes the distance from the NATO policies, the first thing we must do and say is a big radical reform of Europe. Because if we say we want to go back to the single nations where we will easily criticized by the moderates, but also by the analyst, the expert in international politics. Well, which are then the factors that have led us to the reality of today, which is characterized by the nuclear threat, the climatic threat, and the robotic threat. You know that we have dismantled completely the disarmament nuclear architecture. The West has done it because China, Russia, and the BRICS have expressed so many preoccupations for this situation, and they have tried to start a dialogue, to go back to the previous nuclear disarmament. In 2002, the President Bush has left unilaterally the anti-ballistic missile treaty. In 2018, Trump has left the intermediate range missiles. And finally, the Treaty for the Strategic Arms has had a deadline in 2026. Russia proposed the prorogation of this treaty, and we decided that this was not important. As you know, Trump is collecting financial funds for the Golden Dome. The military doctrine is changing. We were saved during the Cold War because we had the mutual assured destruction, which was the deterrence of the Cold War period. Today, nuclear war is not a taboo any longer, and the Western world is struggling to get to the first strike. The possibility to strike with the nuclear arms the enemy without supporting la représaille. I miss the English word, the answer, the military answer of the enemy. So this is very dangerous, and the analysts talk today of nuts. This is very amusing, that the American analysts use words such as MAD, mutual assured deterrence, and now nuts, two words that we know means crazy. And nuts means nuclear target selection, which means that today the conventional war is linked in a very natural way to the employment of tactical nuclear weapons, which is a situation that should alarm everybody, whatever political orientation we have. I do not understand how diplomacy, administration, political leaders, academy is not frightened by the nuclear threat, which is becoming more and more concrete. So how we get to this situation? Geopolitical factors. First of all, starting in the 90s, we dismantled the multilateral system that we had created after the Second World War. Of course, this multilateral system, this so-called liberal order, was just a mirror of the geostrategic interest of the Western powers that had won the war. But at least we had two pillars: United Nations, a OSCE organization, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which could play an important role for the stability and the peace in Europe and in the world. They were not supranational organizations, not even the United Nations, but we believed that the mediation in the Security Council among the powers that had won the Second World War could bring to the avocation, we say avocation in English, to the legitimate use of the military strength by the organization on the behalf of the so-called international community. Well, in the 90s, already before, because we know that during the Cold War, immediately the compromise in the Security Council was not possible. We had two different blocs, but in any case, at times, even the United States and the Soviet Union managed to dialogue and find a compromise. And when the compromise was reached, United Nations could work. But in the 90s, when the Soviet Union failed and unipolarism started, the United States decided that no need for the United Nations, that they could decide by themselves what was wrong and what was right. And so we had the bombardment of Belgrade, without the authorization of the Security Council. Then we had the willingness coalition for Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, but NATO replaced the United Nations because during the Cold War it was a defensive military and political organization, defensive because there was the Warsaw Pact, and was operating only in Europe. After the 90s, with the famous strategic concept, NATO became an aggressive military organization which accompanied around the world, not only in Europe, the interest of the neo-conservative leadership in Washington. And that's why we found NATO in Afghanistan, in Iraq. After, at the beginning, NATO could not go to Iraq because France, Germany, and Belgium decided not to accompany Bush in this horrible enterprise that made 500,000 victims of a war which was based, as today everybody says, on lies. But the Eastern European countries, also Ukraine was part of this coalition. They helped Bush. They were complicit in the attack to Iraq. And then NATO joined. And in Libya has been more or less the same thing. And now in Ukraine, where we have another war for the so-called democracy exportation. So, a neoconservative project. The USA is the most important example. George Kennan, the protagonist of the Soviet Union containment, believed that with the falling of the Soviet Union, another era came to Europe. And finally, the Euro-Asiatic world and the Euro-Atlantic world could discuss dialogue on the basis of the Helsinki principles. And when in 1997, in the Department of State, the Hawks won their battle and they decided that NATO would expand to the east, George Kennan pronounced tragic words that are really visionary, because he said that all the dreams of stability of the eastern border of Europe were disappearing, that the germs of democracy that Russia could have would disappear, and we were creating new tension and we could go towards a war. So this in 1997. And in 1997, Brzezinski, the very well-known counselor of security of Carter, 97, he didn't have this role, so he could write a very enlightening book, The Great Chessboard, in which he said that the only real danger to the hegemony, the US hegemony, was represented by Eurasia, the cohesion between Europe and Russia on the basis of a complementary economic interest, Russian gas and European technologies. And then it was very important to attack Russia through the black hole of Ukraine. 1997, fantastic strategy, and the United States has been coherent. And in fact, all the interest of this suicidal war against Russia are American interest. Germany has renounced to an economic cooperation model that made this country very powerful and made Europe very powerful. We are in economic crisis. The sanctions against Russia have been sanctions against ourselves. The United States managed to have a completely dependent Europe. Germany had always been a problem for the States. For example, when Germany rejected the lies on Iraq and said, we are not going to participate as NATO on this war. When, for example, Merkel was really cold about the war towards Libya, when Germany tried to have with the gasoduct an answer, she said, okay, you want to have a coup d'etat in Kiev, let us save at least the import of gas, which is essential to the German development. But we know which has been the end of the gasoduct. In reality, the United States, with the Ukraine war, decided to have a war against the powers that have an economic surplus: Germany, Russia. And this had to prepare the war with the systemic rival, China. Well, these are the geopolitical factors. We cannot, in the books, of course, I try to be more precise, but in synthesis, this was the main geopolitical problem. And the economic and social factors are very important as well. I'm not an economist, but I could read many books of Varoufakis, Richard Wolff, but also of the philosopher Schreke, Habermas, who speak about these economic problems. And one thing, for me, was important to have a synthesis of what happened. We had a golden time since the Second World War. This golden time was from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where we had the most important achievements of the society. Our democratic constitutions, the struggles of the working class, the welfare state. We built in these years the welfare state, and there was a dialogue between capital and working class. This dialectic ended in the 80s. You remember the 80s were dominated by Thatcher and Reagan, by neoliberalism. And what happened with the neoliberalism? The leading class, the capitalistic class, decided that didn't want to go back to agreement with the working class and did not accept any longer the progressive taxation. So the debt of the state started in this way, when the state had to provide for the affluent society without the fiscal entries of the capitalistic class, but by lending money from the capitalistic class and remunerating these loans with interest rates that started with the free circulation of capitals, started building the financiarization of the economy. And in this new phase, the neoliberalism was became the new catechism. It was in the Maastricht Treaty, and the famous slogan of the Thatcher slogan, "There is no alternative," became a world slogan. I mean, a Western world slogan. What does it mean, there is no alternative? It means that the financial capitalism was making the economic policy as a neutral science. We know very well that every policy, every economic policy, is a question of choices that could privilege some interest and not other interest. But the economic policy was presented as a neutral science because the rules of the financial capitalism had some exigencies that the policies had to respect. So politics were not any longer a project of improving the quality standard of the civil society. Politics were subordinated to the interest of the oligarchs. And of course, the revolution was also cultural because the working class disappeared as a subject of political struggles. What we called, I don't know in English if the expression is right, intermediary bodies finish, parties, trade union, every social aggregation disappeared, and we had the fluid society. The fluid society, as Bauman, the Polish sociologue, has defined our atomized society. You know, we can see that above all with young people. It's rare to see that they go together. Also, if we had an exception, the young people in front of a genocide in streaming, they were so indignated that they could leave their room, their computer, and get together to express this indignation. But in reality, they are not politically organized. And in my opinion, they don't build the links between what happens in the Middle East and what is happening in Europe. We have still a separation. The center left, after 50,000 dead people in Gaza, waking up and discovered that a genocide, they didn't call it a genocide, but they start being interested in what was happening in Gaza, and they criticize Netanyahu, always defending the Israeli history. I mean, the manipulation was, as generally we do the same thing with Trump. No, we isolate the bad guy, Netanyahu or Trump, but we don't want to see as they are the result of an historical process that had since the beginning the how do you say, the premises of what happened after, the causes of what happened at the end. And also the student, the young people, the generation Z, as we call this generation, they were able to decide that Gaza was the symbol of the injustice in the world. The Palestinian people were the victim, but they were much more cautious in judging the Western politics towards Russia. because a certain kind of propaganda that Russia was an autocracy and we were defending in Ukraine the freedom of the democracy gained, and the center left supported this liberal order, this rhetorics. Well, so these are, and then there are also more concrete instruments. In the book, I refer to the denouncement made by Glenn Deason of the financing of think tank and NGO by the states, by the new Endowment for Democracy, you know, this organization that was run by Victoria Nuland, the same neocon that has been working with the Cheney and with Obama, and has been in Maidan Square deciding the members of the government, the Ukrainian government. So she was actively involved in the coup d'etat in Kiev. And also the European Commission, there is another book, Thomas Fazzi, that did a very good work in listing all the financing that the European Commission has given to media, NGO in Europe to incentivize the alignment to the NATO narrative, to the European Union narrative. So the liberalism that we had after the Second World War, in this financial capitalistic society, is becoming more and more authoritarian. That's why everybody before reported about the repression of Pacific manifestation pro-Palestine in the United Kingdom, that once upon the time was the country of the liberal democracy, of the freedom. What else? I don't know. I go on because in reality, there is the possibility to get out of this situation, but with a new political leadership, a new Europe that could understand that in the interest of European people is the mediation, the diplomacy, not the demonization. Not the demonization of Russia, but the comprehension of the legitimate security preoccupation of Moscow. You know, the consolidated bureaucratic language just after the starting of the war in Ukraine, they said unprovoked and unjustified special operation. And for me, this is emblematic of their, how do you say, coda di paglia, we say in Italian. I mean, of their feeling that in reality, this war was provoked, maybe non-justified, but certainly provoked by the Western powers. And so European interests are different. To understand that the entry of Ukraine and Georgia in NATO is, of course, threatening the security of Moscow, because the security has always been territorial, as the crisis, the Cuban crisis in 1962 has demonstrated. But in any case, you can imagine if Mexico wanted to have Chinese or Russia military bases, the Washington would say, yes, please, you can, or there will be a certain resistance. So this is just the hypocrisy of the West. We don't have sphere of influence, but there is a territorial security that has that must be respected, and this we teach that in to the students for the diplomatic concorso in Italy. So generally, a student of 22, 23 years old, he could confirm that security is territorial, and Russia had all the legitimate preoccupations. So Europe should admit that. In any case, if Ukraine was neutral, was a federal state, and had applied the Minsk agreement, which were based on European principle, regional and linguistic autonomy, well, if Ukraine was this kind of country, now it would not be a failed state that has lost a quarter of its population because most people left the country, but above all, we would not have exterminated a generation of young Ukrainians that are fighting a dirty war for neo-American, neo-con interest. And in the Middle East, Europe could do the same thing. The Israeli policy supported by the state is the perpetual war, which is not convenient for the Arab countries and not even for Europe. The mediation between Shiite and Sunnite that instead US has always tried to divide, would be very important for peace in the Middle East. Of course, the resolution on the basis of the two-state principle of just one state, but with the human right assured without the domination of an ethnical terroristic state, because we are talking about that. Israel has become an ethnical terroristic state. So if we could resolve the Palestinian issue, well, we would have peace in the Middle East. But instead, Europe, it's incredible, has condemned the Iranian answer to the aggression, Israelo-American aggression that has made 3,000 victims, women and children, has tried an illegitimate regime change. But has not said anything about this new violation of international law by Washington and Tel Aviv. So the double standard are going to triumph, and the humanistic, because this kind of policy can work only if we manage to dehumanize the victim. And when you go to the social media, you see that most of the people, they are full of hatred, and they see the war between Ukraine and Russia as a football match, where they have to be happy for the death of Russian people and sorry for the death of Ukrainian people. And at the same time, they have to say that Iran is a horrible dictatorship. And so it is good to plan a regime change. Or they have to say that Hamas is responsible of the genocide of Palestinians. So all this policy is based on the dehumanization of other people, Palestinians, Iranians, but also Russians. And this is the West that has lost its humanistic principle, which were laic principle, but also Christian and Jewish principle, because there is a Jewish humanism. And that's the situation. And so my hope is that people become more and more aware of the situation where we are dominated by an oligarchy. It's the same oligarchy which is expressed in Washington by Democrats and Republicans and Trump. The same oligarchy is expressed in Europe in the Rightist Party and also in the European Socialist, which support more or less the same economic policy and foreign policy. You know, in 1996, an Italian writer, politolog, Revelli, had an important intuition. He said, because there was the coalition of Prodi, you know, l'Ulivo, that was facing the coalition of Berlusconi. And he said, in reality, we have two rights, a populist right, the Berlusconi right, and the technocratic right, the Ulivo coalition that today is the Democratic Party. And the middle class will be a sort of ectoplasm that will go one time towards the populistic right and another time towards the theocratic right. And I think this is exactly what we see today. And if the citizenship, the agricultural people, the little industry, because, you know, the big industry, for example, the German big industry is linked to Washington and the dominion of the dollar. But the little industry is another story. That's why they were in Germany the electoral basis of the left, no? The Van Necker project. And if the migrant and the young people, but also the middle class, which is going to become more and more poor, if this civil society understand that today in the West, politics are doing just the interest of the financial, the arm lobby, and the Israel lobby that are very well linked with the big financial fund such as BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. If the citizenship understand this terrible gap between politics and what I call the service class, which are the media, the diplomacy, the administration, and unfortunately also the academy, well, we are going to have a chance to get out of this dystopia. I would stop here if you agree.
Yes, of course, Elena. Thank you so much for that very insightful and multi-layered analysis. It's remarkable how you've woven together many important decisive events over a long time period. So thank you for elucidating these different aspects. I'm sure what you've shared has elicited a number of thoughts, and I see Thomas, your hand is up. Maybe you'd like to start with a comment or a question, and we'll maybe take two and then turn to you, Elena, so you have a chance to respond or comment on what you've heard. Thomas, would you like to start?
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Good.
And you can't see me anymore. I apologize. My camera's really playing up, but I can see all of you and I can hear all of you. So, Thomas.
All right. First of all, I'd like to thank Ambassador Basile for a highly stimulating and enlightening presentation. I have long opposed the entry into the wars in the Middle East and Western Asia of my country of origin, the United States. But now, thanks to her intervention today, I have a clearer sense of the dynamics and factors underlying those interventions. And I really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Ambassador Basile. I don't really have a question. It's just that I really appreciate this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thomas, so we'll move to Alberto Cacopardo. I think you were the second hand up. And then we'll turn to you, Elena, if you want to comment, react. And we'll take another two questions, comments. Alberto, are you there?
He usually has problems in setting his microphone, so
okay.
maybe while he's doing that, you could pass on to Corrado and Jeff. Jeff has to leave soon, so maybe you could give him the word as well.
Okay. Corrado, I hope that's okay. Jeff,
yes,
if you'd like to come in now.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Elena. That's wow, what a sweep. What a solid foundation on which you've developed your views. I think I want to just bring in two questions, and one is the how much of what's going on and what we see right now is due to the Trump effect. Is that sort of an expected evolution that we could have seen way back? And you did allude to some predictions that were quite remarkable. But in the present time, he seems quite like a seismic shift in his power. So in Canada, we can see just how huge the effect has been. So Carney has come up with his middle power speech. We've seen this retreat on climate change and environmental protection that's also being repeated in other parts of the world because that seems to be how you keep up with Trump. There's been a clampdown in immigration in Canada, a shifting attitudes. There's many factors, but I wouldn't rule Trump out as part of it. This new kind of Canadian nationalism reflected in major projects that are really about getting natural resources to global markets and changing those markets in response to Trump. So can the situation in developments in Europe also be seen through this Trump effect? And how does that particular lens, if at all, change how you're seeing things? And then the overlay here to me is also, and it's an aspect of this, but one that you might also speak to, is just this, the trends in climate change, which is getting worse at the same time that because of Trump or whatever else, there's been this global retreat. And then how long will the Trump effect last? It's not going to go away just because he's out of office, because he has now shown to the Americans and to the world what a rogue American presidency can do, and there are plenty of future proto-fascists who are waiting in the wings. So those are some questions that your very stimulating talk brought to mind.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Elena, I'm going to give you a chance to react, comment. You don't have to, answer everything, but we'd love to hear your views.
Okay, thank you. I will be I will try to be synthetical also because unfortunately I didn't plan all that time and I should go in I mean before 8 in any case because I have a dinner at 8. Okay, so Trump. Of course, Trump is the most wild face of the declining empire. So Trump is terrible because he's destroying also the formal appearances from any of the internal politics against the migrants as aspects which are not acceptable. The liberal democracy, it tries to destroy completely the liberal democracy. He doesn't mask his objectives. For example, we take Cuba, we take Venezuela because we need the oil resources. But I do not think that the policy of the empire has changed in the substance. For example, if you take Obama, which was, of course, the leader that we all loved, and compared with Trump, is a completely another kind of person. He's an intellectual. He has a savoir-faire. Is not the the terrible, uncultivated entrepreneur that we have today in the state. But if you think about the policy, the Obama policy, Obama arrived in power in 2009, and there was an Israeli collective punishment, the operation Piombo Fuso. I don't remember the translation in English, but I'm sure you remember. There were 2,500 dead people. Obama did not say a word against this operation. If you think about the use of drones, all the extrajudiciary execution that have been made by Obama, well, you don't see a respect of international law. If you think even about Obama and Kamala Harris policy towards migrant, there was not such a big difference. Deportation of migrants were going on also with Kamala Harris. So we cannot forget that with Biden and Kamala Harris, the genocide started, and they were complicit in the genocide. So I do think that we should not speak only about Trump. We should speak about the American empire policies and the neoconservative policies. And I think the crisis of the financial capital as main exigency to attack the surplus, the economic surplus powers, and take the rare earth, the oil resources, the gas resources, even the water resources, because the capital is in bad shape. The debt, if you look at the debt in the United States and the possibility of growth, you can understand that in front of the systemic rival, China, which is becoming a technological rival, China is already very powerful in many high-tech sectors. It has found a way to bypass the dollar. So these are the structural causes of the permanent war. This in spite of the personality of Trump, Obama, and so on.
Thank you, Elena. Very important to highlight those structural determinants. Very quickly, Corrado and Grazia, Elena's going to have to leave very soon. So could I please ask that you make your questions very short to give Elena a chance to possibly... Can you stay with us another 10 minutes, Elena, or would that be too much?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Corrado, over to you, Corrado.
Okay. Thank you, Elena, for your brilliant presentation. And my question is very short and focused on the connection between international politics and domestic politics. So don't you think that the so-called extreme right movement that we have in France, Germany, Italy too, well, Italy a little bit less, but a few, United Kingdom with Farage, how can they influence the international politics? Because we call them extreme right movements, but there are also other populist movements that somehow merge into them. So how can the domestic politics influence the international politics? That's the question. This is a very simple question.
Well,
It's a difficult question, but very short.
No, thank you. Very
Elena, let me add my question so that you have a quick final time, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I just first, like everybody else, I really would like to thank you profoundly, because at least for Italians, I think you have represented the voice that for many of us who are more in the international scene is represented by a variety of commentators and thinkers who have moved out of the political scene into a thoughtful, critical analysis of a variety of aspects, from the economic to the power to the technological and so on. So I like to thank you as an Italian for what you have done for Italy, which is really remarkable, because in Italy the voices are few and yours is among really the top articulation. What I would like to ask is possibly the question that is in the mind of all of us. How do we get out of this absolute nightmare? Because it is an absolute nightmare. And I would say that we shouldn't get bogged down by the politics, because the politics is the top layer that we all see and we all get entangled in discussing. But below it, there is the level, well, some would say, of the secret services, very much entangled with the crime scene all over the world. And below it, and actually moving it all, is the financial powers, the powers that are in fact commanding and controlling and being somehow hidden. Now, where is the nightmare? The nightmare is that the financial powers have been behind all the major wars, the First World War, the Second World War, and are preparing the Third World War with all their might, hiding behind all sorts of, easy to see and easy to have fun with colorful people like Trump and so on. But if you share this view, and many of the things that you said seem to share this view, if these economic powers, and we can push this analysis to the point of moving from the pound as main currency before the First World War to the dollar as main currency after the Second World War to the possible technological currency after the Third World War, and actually having the Third World War as an entry to this technological currency that would dominate everybody and be very easy in controlling who can survive and who is going to die. If this is the picture that we all may want to have in front of us more and more clearly, thanks to people like you, how do we get rid of it? Yes, indeed, better awareness, but what more is needed? I sorry to pose such a difficult question, but thank you again. And any thought you may have would be most gratefully received.
Okay, well, the first question were about the rightist movement. I'm so sorry because I'm very pessimistic about the situation, so it is difficult for me to transmit hopes. I have seen Meloni. Meloni was able to canalize the dissentiment. She was the only one that was out the Draghi agenda and coalition in Italy, and she talked against Europe. She talked against the banks and financial capitalism. Well, one time she has been, when she has become premier president of the council, she behaved in a way that allowed her to keep her, how do you say, fauteuil, la poltrona, her power, her political power. The problem is that if the politics are dominated by the oligarchy, the financial oligarchy, if you want to be a politician, if you want to be an influent politician, if you want to be the premier of a country, you must play your role. Otherwise, they just get rid of you. And what's more, the rightist people do not have an ideology which is my cup of tea. For example, on the genocide, they are terribly complicit. They are, on the contrary, much more pragmatic in relation with the war against Russia, because they think about economic interest, so they are more pragmatic. But in any case, they do not represent a real alternative. What we can do? Well, the problem is that if economic interest have always been a part of our history and have influenced the wars. No, the First World War was between a declining empire, UK, and the ascending German power. And today we could say that the Third World War will be determined by a declining empire, the American, and the ascending power of China. I do think that the difference that today there is between the 1% elite and the 90% of the society is a unique factor. And this is not told by me or by us, by the dissentiment. This is told by people in Davos. They have recognized that the social inequalities and the concentration of wealth is something unique of this historical period. So it is possible that with the time, with the economic crisis and the pain, civil society will understand this distance and there will be a political work for a new leadership. Now I don't see many possibilities, but as I keep repeating, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. You remember Sisyphus takes the big stone up to the mountain, and the stone goes back, goes down again. So I think we are trying to fight barbarism, and there are so many movements and difficulties also for the leading class, and there are the BRICS. Well, I do not think that China or Russia are better than us, but today China, Russia, and the BRICS need trade, need political and economic stability for their development. So I think there could be a hope if we learn to dialogue with them. I mean, they represent, like in Sant'Agostino, the catechon, the frame to the evil. Unfortunately, we are, the Western world is on the bad part of the history, I think, today. So all the different powers, such as the BRICS, are welcome. I don't know if I answer you, but I tried, and now I have to leave you. It was a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Elena. We're really grateful. And this recording will be available to everyone. And I'm sure people will reach out to you. Thank you so much, and enjoy your dinner. And we hope to continue our conversation another
Thank
time,
you.
another place.
Thanks
With
again.
pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Michelle?
Michelle,
Hello?
another.
Michelle, are you closing the meeting or?
Yes, I'm closing. I was waiting for Elena to leave, and I just wanted to thank you all for being with us.
Yeah.
And that was quite a journey through history, and deeply insightful. So there's a lot of food for thought. Thank you, Grazia, for facilitating Elena's coming into
Yeah,
this circle.
she's an amazing round thinker, and
Yeah.
what I said is indeed true. I mean, she's one of the most thoughtful people who have brought about a different way of reading politics and power plays in Italy. So, yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you. Well, I'll wish you all very well. Have a good morning, a good evening, depending on where you are on the globe. And see you next time. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao a tutti.
Ciao.